middle of an auction, and I was so I may have to kind of stop for a few minutes to bid on something, but that's about it.
Okay, that sounds great. So why don't we start? We'll each introduce ourselves, and then I'll start to ask you some questions.
Okay.
So my name is Ted Kerr. I am talking to you about. I'm representing the Miami AIDS Memorial Project, and I use he/him pronouns.
Okay. What about pronouns? I
Oh,
don't
you don't
understand.
have to. I just named that I use he/him, but you can say whatever you want.
Okay, I have no preference here.
Great. Do you want to just give us your name and what you'll be talking about today?
Well, my name is R. Michael Lee, and I believe you're talking about the AIDS Memorial Garden in Houston, Texas, that I started back in 1986.
Yeah. I would love it if you could tell me a little bit about what inspired you to start it.
Well, at that stage, I just can remember that it was a scary stage in my life. I think I didn't, um, and in 19, uh, prior to that period, I was living in the Middle East. So I was kind of away from everything going on in the United States dealing with AIDS. And I really didn't really discover that until I came back to the US maybe in 1982-ish, maybe. And I actually was down at a beach house with some friends, and and then one of them brought a magazine. I think it was Time or Life magazine or Newsweek, and it talked about the gay disease. And all of a sudden, the fear kind of set in. All of us, and we didn't know what that meant and where it was going. So anyway, that's kind of the start of the end of the gay, the gay, you know, do what you want, you know, era of, being young and doing whatever you want kind of thing. So it was kind of like a damper on um, of what I was used to, particularly coming from the Middle East. Because I was kind of isolated there anyway.
Hmm.
So anyway, so that's when a lot of friends started dying off. That, and I can remember the first time that I went to get tested, and it was that stage where when you got tested, it took a week to get the results. So for a week, you're waiting to see if you're going to live or die, basically.
Hmm.
Um, so that was the fear of the atmosphere, of what was going on. Is that it was a bunch of fear and dread, and then when friends started dying and you're visiting them in the hospitals, and you're having talented people around you dying, it was just like, it was depressing. I don't know how else you can place it. It was just, you know, it's, and ended up by 1986. I think I've lost your image. Oh, there you are.
I'm still here. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Um, anyway, it was a very trying, emotional, scary stage of life to be in. And then by 1976, when I decided to buy a house, and got to get settled there, is that where that took a lot of my time for the renovation, and ended up being that all the friends that I'd known after I came out and lived in Houston were dead. I had none
Mm.
left. None. I have no friends to this day, from that period of my life in the 20s, when I was 20 years old and 30 years old. There none lived. And the last friend His name was it was, I guess it was a partner, Elvin McDonald and his partner. Um, they were both authors, and they had, I think Elvin had photographed my house to put into a magazine he was working on, and then his lover, I forget his name now, um, took some of some of the garden architecture that I did and used them in a book that got published. And then when Bill was as his name, and then when Bill was in the hospital dying, he was kind of like the last of, and I go, I need to do something about this, and then I decided, and I love gardening. It's kind of the way I escape. And my home backed up to an abandoned um, railroad right away. And it just became a dumping grounds for trash. There were some fraternities that used it for a parking lot, and then they had these huge parties, and it was just like it was a problem. So I just started blocking it off, planting trees, cleaning up trash, and with the vision that I was going to be a garden, and it kind of progressed into an an AIDS garden. And then I think by the time about 2000, the city was trying to obtain the property from the railroad as a bike trail, and the garden had been pre-existing for nearly 20 years. And so they decided that they were going to do it, and we, I guess, kind of circled the wagons and got them to stop putting it through that one section. But we had a gay mayor. Her name was Anise Parker, just an evil woman. Um, anyway, she decided that the garden was illegal. And one morning I wake up and there's bulldozers, going through the garden, tearing everything out, you know, you know, uh, totally unnecessary. She had police there. She was going to get it done no matter what. And anyway, so that kind of launched the stage of being something joyful and healing, all of a sudden became a burden and a bad memory in itself because of this destruction. So I basically just gave up and walked away from it all. Didn't maintain it. The large trees got established. In that 10-year period, I think, um, and then not until Ed Petty got involved with Friends of Columbia Tap that went into a revival stage. We started cleaning things back up, putting order back in there where we could put gardens back in. So now we're at that, I call it revival stage. We're now, it's a pleasant experience. But there was 10 years where it was just a bad experience. And it's all because of one mayor. And she was gay.
Yeah.
That was the
Michael,
disturbing part of it.
it's such a powerful story. I want to go back to the beginning, and um, I think it's really remarkable that you started it in the first place. Um, you said that gardening was important to you. I wonder what was some early reactions? Like, did you tell people that you had started this garden as an AIDS memorial garden, or was it
Mm,
something private? I would love to know that kind of community vibe at the
It
beginning.
was it was mostly private and a few friends. There was a few. I think there was the Yard and Garden Society, which was a kind of a gay gardening club. They all knew about it. Um, but the neighborhood I live in was kind of neighborhood going into a regentrification process because it was a Jewish ghetto that all the Jews were forced out. The blacks moved in. It was these grand homes on grand estates, and the state decided to put a freeway through the middle of it so that the blacks were on one side and the whites were on the other back in the 60s. I mean, the neighborhood itself is got a colorful drama to it. But I found a grand old house there, neoclassical house, and I just fell in love with the neighborhood just because of the architecture and the setting among all these incredible, stately oak trees. And so, um, forgot where I was going with that, but where I was going with it is that I belong to a civic club, but the reaction of the black community to gays at that time was that we're a, you know, a pariah. Like if I went to a civic club meeting and sat there, everyone get up and move to another section. Someone's gay, someone's got AIDS, we don't want to be near them. So I never involved the civic club, and anything like this. So the only part people are involved were, I guess, the Yard and Guard Society. And those people are still friends to this day, but that was my, I guess, a second generation of friends.
When I first heard of the garden, I was really inspired because I think of a garden as something participatory, which often memorials aren't participatory. Often people just go and visit a memorial or they go and visit a statue. But with a garden, it takes uptake, it takes upkeep. And I'm wondering if you and people in the gardening society saw the act of keeping the garden as a form of honoring the dead or keeping people's memory alive.
Well, they didn't got there was one fellow, he was a horticulturalist, and he helped get plant material for me. I had certain specifics of what I wanted to get, and he was able to track down like dwarf saw palmetto, a native palm tree that only gets like 3 or 4 feet tall. And then I had another friend. She was a doctor, basically a PhD research scientist at Baylor, and so she got me involved with doing cross pollination of different cultivars of Louisiana iris and daylilies. So through them, and I got plant material, and that was really, and so it became. She had a garden back there. She was working with rain lilies. Um, I had a huge daily garden back there and rose garden that my partner put in. But that was the participation. That was about it. Um, so it was at best the garden was unplanned. It was kind of like, because you're talking about a huge 100-foot wide right of way that goes on for miles. So I'm just dealing with one little section, and each year it got a little bit bigger. So it was I guess the best thing to say, it was an organic process.
Mm-hmm.
It
I mean,
wasn't
it
a
seems.
it wasn't a it was a vision of what I wanted it to be, and finally it was is basically when it became a AIDS monument, or when it basically became identifiable as an AIDS garden, is when I put a huge column in. Um, and so we had a dedication of that in about 2004 with the Garden and Yard Society. And that kind of was the anchor, and then the plaza that goes around it, which was a vision of what I wanted to do with the AIDS garden, with naming, putting bricks in with all the names on it. As I said, it was an organic process. Like I didn't wake up one morning saying, okay, we're going to have an AIDS garden here, we're going to have a column here, we're going to have different kind of type experimental gardens, or tree planting scenario. It was kind of an organic process that basically started in 1986. And that's the way
Mm-hmm.
gardening is an organic process. It just doesn't like, um, private estates become gardens, but started as a public garden, never started as a private garden, and later they became public. Some of the famous gardens, throughout the US were all private estates that eventually became gardens. And they went through their metamorphosis over time and later got established or got a history. I was from St. Louis, and there was the Missouri Botanical Gardens, which I was familiar with. The estate of Henry Shaw. Interesting. I'm surprised I haven't done a film about this guy. He was basically a bachelor. You can connect the dots there really quickly. And made his money off of everyone going west through St. Louis to go to the east, going to the west coast. And he basically had a hardware store, and our hardware corporation that supplied everything. But his estate became the Missouri Botanical Gardens, and it's sort of a so I so for me, growing up in that environment, gardening was the way it was. I learned from my grandmother, about planting material. Um, but when I moved to Texas, my palate had to change because of the climate. There's different things that just does in this climate that won't do up there, and vice versa. So
Hmm.
um, so so gardening was an experiment because I tried plant materials that would grow in the Midwest, found they didn't do well. Dr. Joanne Trial at Baylor, was in the Rare Fruit Society, so we had exotic fruit trees back there and orange trees at one time, and that was when the climate was a little bit warmer in Houston. Um, Now we get freezes so citrus are they're basically gone except for ones I may keep in my yard only. But it was an experimental place. It changed. The only thing that's really kind of stayed there and matured was the large bald cypress trees, which are now, huge stately trees, close to 45 years old. But the problem is that garden in the dark ages was always a magnet for utility companies that come through and start with their chainsaws. And I had to kind of since I back up to it, I could hear the chainsaws going. So I had to run back and see what's going on, to stop the tree trimmers from doing the butchering things. And that went on for years. And now that with Ed, he's got it recognized. I know he's put me up for different awards. So, and now the mayor's issued a proclamation. He's got the Houston Area Galveston Council issued award last year, and this year they've put up $7 million, um, for the Columbia tap. So again, it's on its way.
Yeah. When in the process did you know it was an AIDS Memorial Garden?
Well, when I got it started, I believe,
So from the very beginning in your heart, you understood what you were doing.
yes.
That's beautiful. You said that there was a period where um, I can't remember the exact words you said, but you needed to let go of it for a while, and it kind of got overgrown, and the this horrible sounding mayor did all of her horrible stuff. What period was that? What years are we talking about there?
And God, when did she? Because I had to get attorneys involved with all that, with Vincent and Elkins. The city actually obtained the right of way, except the railroad wouldn't step in to define or evict me from the garden. So the city then claimed that the garden was illegal, and they issued a condemnation. So then I got Vincent and Elkins attorneys involved, and we didn't prevail on that. And um, anyway, that's when I can't remember the years of the lawsuit.
Okay.
Um, the timeline. I think Ed may have all that. I probably have a timeline in my
Yeah.
records of all that.
Yeah,
And
I mean that. I want to give you another compliment. You've been so good at record keeping. When people do research on the garden, there's the link tree where you provide a lot of information. In the email you sent me, there's lots of data. Can you tell me the importance of what compels you to ensure that people understand the story behind the garden?
um, I think Ed is the only one that's really kind of promoting that with getting me to talk about it.
Okay.
I think that's where I'm at the stage in life where I don't want to really be, um, you know, I'm content where I'm at. I'm
Hmm.
content with just gardening, but when it comes to being out there promoting it, I don't do that. I don't have,
Okay.
interest in it, and it's a downfall, because what that means is that there's a lot of things that need to be done, such as uh, completing the plaza with the AIDS names on it and getting funding for all of that. So, but Ed's kind of the money guy, and I'm just kind of
Uh-huh.
the visionary person, and that's where I really want to be. Um,
Can you describe the vision that you have for the garden? There's the pillar, there's the plaque. I would love to hear more about that and anything that you want to do in the future.
um, okay, hold on, I'm in the middle of this bidding thing right now.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, let me see, give me a few seconds here, right in the middle of it,
of course.
and yeah, no more. It's going up too high.
Oh, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
no, no, that's all right. I have a lot of art, so I have a huge selection of art. So, um, go ahead and repeat the question again.
Yeah, I would love to hear a little bit about more about the pillar and about when you put in the plaque and why those were important and what they mean to you.
Well, the column, the calling an AIDS garden needed to have something physically concrete that told the city, hey, this is something special. That's not a bunch of random plants, that are, planted on an abandoned right away. So the column became important, and I paid for it myself, to get it installed. Is because okay, now we got a marker here saying this is an AIDS garden, and of course that had to be identified with a plaque, and so I installed that. So that's all around 2002, maybe. Well, we had a dedication 2004, so it's close to that period of time when that was all
Hmm.
done. There was no plaque before that.
And why a column? What's the meaning for you of a column?
Well, a lot of it became it was something I could. It, when you're an art collector and you buy stuff, you usually buy things at the low end is instead of on the high end things. Like I had friends that had a factory, and they basically produced architectural elements, and they had a boneyard, and in the boneyard there'll all be these architectural things that I could go over there and select from and buy for next to nothing. And this column was one of these things. Was had a chip on it. It was rejected by the owner, so it sat there in peace. And I said, no, I want that. So I moved it over there and had some masons erect it. So, and it just became a perfect thing. And then the plaza going around it, so it just evolved. Um, so again, it
What's
was
your
very
vision?
organic.
What's your vision for the future of the site?
Well, one of the important thing is really getting that plaza put in with the names. That's the essential thing that has to happen, because I know when we did a dedication, um, we had a time capsule. I still have it, that everyone put in names of people that they knew into this time capsule in 2004. Um, so again, it was, now the names need to be immortalized in brick, so that they're not forgotten.
And I know that you're asking for people to add new names as well. So has it been an ongoing process of collecting names since 2004?
Well, that's another thing, is the manpower to do that. Um,
Uh-huh.
I think a guy's name was Doyle, J.D. Doyle, had a book out, something in 1984, something about the pre-AIDS days. Anyway, he has collected out of basically newspaper clippings, out of gay publications, of obituaries. And so he has that list. Of course, it's not a database that's going to have to be manually um, regenerated into an express database, so that it can be used. So when we put the order in for bricks, they have the names and the places and the dates and everything in order to do that. Well, that has to be done. And my goal this year is I found someone that's willing to do this, to take that on, because that's a big task. Is coordinating, getting all the names together. I know there was I think Allies and Hope in Houston. I think that when we had a rededication this past year in 2004, on the anniversary of the original dedication, at 20 years later, um, the president of Allies and Hope were here. We talked about it, but I've sent them emails. They don't respond. So it shows that they had no interest in putting together lists of names, which is kind of surprising. So, it's just, maybe I'm 70. In fact, today's my birthday, so I'm 72
Happy
today.
birthday.
Yeah. So, so I'm just hoping it gets done before I die. So is all I'm saying.
Well, happy birthday. It is nice to see you on your birthday. It was my birthday 15 days ago.
Oh wow. So you're Capricorn, right?
I'm a Capricorn. What are you?
Aquarian.
Aquarius. Okay. Um, I mean, this is kind of a deep question. I don't know if you want to think about this, but something that I find interesting about the garden that you started is that I think it lends itself to help us think about the history of AIDS memorialization in the U.S. And I'm wondering what you think what your garden tells us about how AIDS is remembered in the U.S.
Well, my garden started right in the middle of the pain,
Mm.
of the unknown. Um, and and at that time, if you could tell me that the garden was going to be like it was today, I couldn't tell you. I just knew that it was something in progress, but it was put in place because of the pain of, instead of drinking, going to drugs or that, gardening was my outlet. So that solved my pain issue with dealing with the AIDS epidemic. It was some people write music. Some people, do books. I garden. So that was my creative outlet to my personal journey with the pain of the AIDS epidemic. And now it's kind of funny that now it's finally being recognized, as a garden. And it pretty much reflects historically what was going on and why. I mean, the AIDS quilt was going on at the same time, trying to, bring memory to everything. Um, and that's why the names is important in all this, is that, again, it's that memory that is necessary, and going, someone comes to the AIDS garden, now they come because it's a beautiful place. The trees have matured, so it's kind of like, a green belt in the middle of a right of way that everything else is kind of barren except for this one spot. Um, it's got some interesting terrain that's different than most of the area around the Columbia Tap, because there's these huge ravines that were put in by the railroad for drainage, so for flood mitigation. So so there's some terrain there that I was able to basically dam up and create what I call wattles, or bioswales, which now have become like habitat for amphibians. And now there's this huge habitat that's gone on back there, where now we get migrating ducks that build nests back there. The I populated some of the dammed up areas with crawfish from the local market, live crawfish. Some of the herons show up, the toads show up, and the frogs show up, and now the bats show up to eat all the insects, that are there. So it's all of a sudden it's became a thriving um, natural environment that people come to see. In the city, in a huge metropolitan area. You know,
Yeah.
um, so it's doing what it's supposed to do.
Michael, as you're talking and you're so eloquently able to connect the garden to the larger forces of HIV/AIDS, I want to add to that as well. You've rightfully pointed out that the garden was started in a moment of pain, and now it's being recognized in a moment where the AIDS crisis is still ongoing, but it's more integrated, just like the garden is more
Yeah,
integrated.
actually, what I find troubling is that age is all of a sudden become nostalgic, with politicians. They go, oh yeah, I had someone cousin who had AIDS, and it's all of a sudden, particularly in the Black community, now it's become nostalgic. No one understands what it was like growing up in it, where you were a pariah. I mean, the police can, I mean, if you were thrown in jail and you had AIDS, or you were gay, you were put in a special section. I live really close to the Texas Medical Center, and the Texas Medical Center didn't want AIDS victims in their medical center. It's one of the largest medical centers in the world. I don't know if you ever heard of the Texas Medical Center. So what they did is they basically got an old motel way out in the suburbs and called that the gay hospital, to get them
Mm.
as far away from the medical centers you could possibly get them. I mean, that's what was going on. It was that you were a pariah.
Do you think that people living with HIV now find peace or find comfort or find themselves at home in your garden?
I don't know. I mean, there are a few people that come through, that maybe after we talk, they may admit that they're gay, or they HIV positive. Um, but really, that doesn't come up in discussions. I really don't know. I think now that AIDS is now that can be controlled with medication. That fear isn't there, like it was before. It was a death sentence. So it really doesn't come up in conversation, to tell you the truth.
And
You
when you
know,
think about who is your audience for the garden, who is the audience? Who do you hope feels welcome there?
well, everybody comes back there now. I mean, I mean, Black families that come back there, and we have these volunteer days, and everyone shows up to plant trees. It's just kind of like, again, it's become an anchor that's become nostalgic.
Mhm. Can you say
And
more?
and
I hear what you're saying, but I would love it if you could. How does that nostalgia feel to you?
well, um, I'm glad I did it.
Mhm.
I mean, if you want to talk, if you really want to say, I'm so happy that I did it and stuck with it. You know, um, and that's satisfying. You know, that it's finally made full circle, where we had one mayor that determined that it was illegal to another mayor issuing a proclamation. It's kind of reaffirming, but it just it just it just shows you how, oh, fickle our political system is. It's just that, it's just, once you're a pariah, then next thing you know, oh God, you did a garden. Boy, did you do something great for the community. It's just that kind of irony that I live through,
Mhm.
you
Um,
know. I mean,
I would.
it's just the way it is. I mean, I can't do anything to change what happened in the past, and I certainly can't predict the future. But I'm happy to see that it's come full circle,
I
and that's
mean,
only
I think
because
for
of
me,
and that's only
my
because of of actually working with Ed and his foundations. Is that before that period of meeting with him, is that I had a very bitter opinion about humanity, particularly Civic Club. I mean, they're just ornery people, And it wasn't to working with Ed and all his volunteers that I get all of a sudden, um, what was the term I want to use? What was it like? I was excited to see that there are other people that have altruistic, are altruistically motivated and not all about me things, And it was just amazing is the word I want to use. Amazing that there were people out there like this, Rotary clubs that, want to drop and volunteer to help do things. You know, Particularly with our civic club here, it was the complete opposite. They were going to do what they could to make things bad, so I didn't get them involved. And in fact, it wasn't. I think last year I just wanted to kind of beautify as one of the main entrance into the neighborhood and landscape it. So I got the Civic Club, we bought trees, and I got volunteers to dig the holes and plant the trees. Well, we had this one black woman decided she didn't want them there, and she pulled them out of the ground and stomped on them. I mean, that's our Civic Club. And then you tell the Civic Club about it. I said, well, it's your fault. You should have talked to her. I said, well, she doesn't even live in the neighborhood. Well, it's your fault. And then, that comes to uh, the reimbursement for the expenses. Well, we're not going to pay you because you never got anything installed. That's our civic club. Why do I want to deal with people like this? They're so negative. Um, so with Ed and his group, it's complete opposite. Like, what can we do to help? There's no obstacles. There's no, it's refreshing to see that there are elements of humanity that still exist, but I that's the dilemma I deal with. So um, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, that is a good point. I would love it. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share?
No, no. I mean, we have black churches in a neighborhood. None of them ever stepped up and say, "Yeah, how can we help you?" It doesn't exist in that
I
mentality.
mean,
It just,
so
it
Ed,
just
I
does
hear
not
what you're
exist.
saying. Yeah, Michael, I hear what you're saying. I'm curious about your relationship to race and HIV.
I don't know. I don't know what is that. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I can tell you from experience that I had some really negative experiences based upon race. I mean, there was a time when I was running for the board of our civic club, and someone said, "Yes, we're not going to. No one white's ever going to be on our board." It was that kind of reverse discrimination. But because you're gay, it just made it acceptable on their part. I don't know. I
And
can't explain it.
for you, for me, when I think about HIV, I think about the communities most impacted by HIV have been obviously gay people, the LGBT community, but also Black people. And I
Oh, they
wonder
have.
if, and I wonder if that has come into the garden, if there has been any sort of community building or tension around the different ways that HIV impacts different communities.
I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that. Now that it's there and it's established and people know that I did it, everyone's very polite. But and so I just leave it at that. But historically, um, I mean, I guess historically, whenever I guess before that mayor went through it with the bulldozers, there was a black woman in the neighborhood, and she was aiding and abetting the city to get it all destroyed. I didn't find out till years later, and she called herself a friend. And then I discovered this. So I don't know. I can't explain it. It's just that I have a very cautious attitude about that. In fact, I put in a big bioswale last year, um, and Ed is kind of, I guess, is I've gotten involved enough with our councilwoman, and she's very supportive that there was a neighbor down at the end that decided she was going to report this as a cesspool for mosquitoes. And she worked as a department head somewhere in the city. So she reported to Public Works, and Public Works came out, and I was supposed to meet with them, and they gave me like 3 hours notice that they're going to be there, and I couldn't do because I had a doctor's appointment. And then the next thing you know, that the city is declaring that it's an illegal dam and needs to be broken down. Well, Ed worked out with the city councilwoman that all went away. But that's what happens in this area, is that even when we do volunteer day, no one from our civic club or the immediate neighborhood shows up to help. Nobody. Now, I don't know what that is, why that is. If they still have this chip on their shoulder about blacks, a chip on their shoulder because the garden was planted by a white man. I have no idea. It's just the way it is.
I mean, race relations are complicated, right?
Oh, yeah, I just stay away from it. I have a neighbor who's black and he's an attorney. We're good friends, and he's talked about it, but it's just, as a whole, I don't want to mess with it. Life's too short now. You know, um,
So
it's cautious.
in a few years, there will be an anniversary, right? Like if 1981 marks the beginning of the AIDS response in the U.S., we'll soon be approaching 50 years of responding to AIDS in the U.S. I wonder, what is your hope for the future of your garden and the future of the AIDS response in the U.S.?
Well, I think it's already come around. It's become acceptable. Um, I don't know if it's acceptable in all populations, equally. Um, but I think that it's already turned itself around. And again, the whole thing about the AIDS Memorial Garden, it's a memorial, and a need to identify the victims, saying these are the people that suffered through this and didn't make it. And even when I gave a talk before the mayors, and I said, and I get kind of teared up when I talk about it. And one of the councilors says, well, we can understand, I guess they call it the the I guess is when a victim survives. There's a term for that. The
Oh,
buzzword for this.
Survivors Guild.
Yeah, survivor's guilt. And he kind of mentioned that, and it wasn't in a derogatory sense at all. It was that he just kind of, you know, it was something I just could remember that, like, survivor's guilt, and that's true, and that's absolutely, he actually nailed it, to tell you the truth. Um, I survived it all.
And we have the garden to remind us,
And we had the
and keep
gardener
honoring.
and we had the gardener to remind us. And that's it. You know,
Um,
and these stories, um, you know, I think there's some little plaque that they put out there with kind of a little about a paragraph of the history of the garden. They had kind of had it installed, so people I saw out there not there working. Oh yeah, you're this guy. You're on the sign. So all of a sudden you become, all of a sudden a little bigger than life for a moment. And I think little things like this change things. There are little moments like that. And then some people say, "Yeah, can I help you?" And so, like, this one young man who was back there, and he said, "How can I help you?" Then I said, "Okay, well." We said, "Well, I got to put up this pagoda in the middle of the waterway." And so yeah, came over one weekend. We put the pagoda up, and I think tomorrow or Monday's coming over to help put a bunch of cuttings up, because before a freeze, I usually go out there and make a lot of cuttings from tender plants to propagate them for the next year. And he's going to come over and help do that. So it's just, I call them little things like this. Nothing major. This is a little thing, but it all has a very positive, pleasant experience about it. When Joanne would show up with her rain lilies, and we put those out there, it was a great experience. It made it for this. It wasn't worrying about anything else. It was just that the dirt under the hands. And actually have a theory in life that whenever I find somebody's a gardener, they're usually just good people.
mm,
You know, and so whenever I run across somebody that has long fingernails and things like this, and they say they're gardening, I kind of look at with suspicion, because you can't garden with long fingernails. It just doesn't, it's not going to work. So so anytime I meet a true gardener, they're already going to be that. And farmers, they're all just good-hearted people. I grew up with a family of farmers, and there was no nonsense, good people. Um, and I kind of expected that in general throughout my life, but obviously that wasn't going to be the case.
yeah. Well, I want to thank you for starting the garden and keeping it up. And I want to thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad we got this all on the record. So thank you so much.
All right. So what are you doing next with all this? So what is
So
so
I
what's the
give
what's
it
the big picture here?
the big picture is it goes to the AIDS Miami AIDS Memorial folks, and they create a YouTube channel. And these interviews are a series of interviews that'll be posted.
Oh, not the full interview. You're going to edit it, I hope.
Um, No, I mean, probably the beginning and the end, but no, it'll be as is. It's like a primary document so people can learn about memory and AIDS from people like yourself who were early and important thinkers.
Interesting. I think I would edit it first. I would have take out the race element, to tell you the truth. Even
It's
though it's a
complicated.
painful truth, you know.
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, all of us, a lot of people aren't in enough practice to talk about race, and so the more we do it, I think the better it is. Actually, it's an uncomfortable subject for some people, and so maybe we do need to talk about it more.
Yeah, but I don't know there's a real solution. There's always, I'll tell you what happens is that in our civic club, my example is if that if you get involved with a group, like say I was doing that tree planting, and then something goes wrong, is that they'll circle the wagons based upon race. It happens 100% of the time. Logic goes out the window, and the wagons are just circled, and it gets down to race. And it's a strange excuse, but that's what happens. Things go bad, all of a sudden becomes race. You know, it's a police shooting, whatever happens, it's a race thing, and it gets down to circling the wagons with race. Not until that excuse goes away, I think there's any way to solve the problem. But right now, um, circling the wagons is what I know. This happens. My brother was with the Army Corps of Engineers and worked as an administrator. And whenever there was something in the office that went wrong and had to do with something that was black, all of a sudden the wagons would start circling, and he kind of knew it what to do. But he, you know, was aware of it. It's just the way things are.
Well, again, I appreciate your time. I
Yep.
do think talking about it is good, and I'm
Yeah.
really grateful that the garden exists.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.